Hey guys, Jamie at the Summer Rain channel. Welcome back. Today I'm doing a video that I've been wanting to do for some time now, and it is a beginner's melt and pour soap video. So if you've never used melt and pour soap before, or if you're new to using melt and pour soap, this is going to cover all of the stuff from the equipment you need to how you make it, all of that jazz. I did put a link down below to my blog, so I go a little bit more in depth in my blog post when I'm explaining the different steps that we do and why it is that we do them. So if you want to go check that out, that is down there down below. I did want to mention, so when you first start making your own melt and pour soap, like a lot of people's instinct is just like, hey, I'm gonna take this whole 5-pound thing of soap, I'll melt it up, and I'm gonna make all kinds of melt and pour soap. I strongly urge you not to do that. So I find that it's best to work in small batches when you're first getting started, because there's nothing worse than I have this whole block of soap and the entire thing is ruined. It is a little bit of a learning curve. Not that it's super difficult once you get used to it, but you have to get used to it. So I always start out by making like 1 bar at a time, and then I test that bar. What do I like about it? What don't I like about it? And then I change from there. Without further ado, let's dive in and learn all of the steps and all of the equipment that you need to make your own melt and pour soap. And if you haven't done so already, be sure you hit that subscribe button. Here are the equipment ingredients that you're going to need to start making melt and pour soap. And I know it looks like a lot, but just hear me out, because a lot of this stuff you probably already have in your kitchen. So you're going to need a cutting board. Any cutting board will do. You're going to need a knife or a soap cutter. Now, I personally like the crinkle cut. I just feel like it cuts the soap nice. But they also have the one that's straight, so you don't wind up with the crinkle cuts. You're going to need a scale. Now, the reason why you need a scale is you actually need to know how much the soap weighs, so you can weigh out the fragrance oil to make sure that your soap is safe to use. So you can't just kind of eye it and be like, meh, I think that's enough fragrance oil. It doesn't really work that way. So you want to make sure that when you're making your soap, it's safe to use, and that's why we need the scale. You're going to need a microwave safe container. I just use like a regular measuring cup, a silicone spatula, rubbing alcohol, and I just put this in a spray bottle. Now we use that to go ahead and pop any bubbles in our soap, and then also to disperse the mica powder. You're going to need melt and pour soap. And these two, I guess, are optional, but if you're making soap, you probably want them, a bit of mica powder and then some fragrance oil. And you're also going to need molds. Now, I am partial to the silicone molds. I really feel like they hold up a lot better than the plastic ones do. But say if you go to the store and you get a melt and pour kit and it comes with a plastic one, that's completely fine to use. I just like these because I feel like they don't break on you, and I find them easier to get the soap out of them. Once you have your mold, if you have no idea where to start, like how much soap do I need to put in here in order to create a bar of soap, I have a pretty good system that will get you close to where you need to be. So what you want to do is go ahead, turn your scale on, and we're going to put our mold on there. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to press the tare button. So what that's going to do is give you all zeros, and we're going to fill the mold with water. And this holds 3.62 ounces of water. So we're going to go with about 3.5, 3.6 ounces of soap for one cavity. So now we're going to go ahead and cut our soap base for our mold. What I like to do is go ahead, I grab the scale again. So turn your scale on and put a bowl on it. Press the tare button. This is going to bring you back to all zeros. That way we can get the 3.6 ounces of melt and pour soap into our container. So to cut the soap, you just press down. The most important thing when you're cutting it is you kind of want to have the same size chunks. They don't have to be all a certain size. You just kind of want to get them all roughly the same size. And you're just going to pop it into your bowl. Until we get to the 3.6 ounces. Okay, so we're at 3.66 ounces, which is very close. I'm going to call that good for this soap. So the fragrance oil that I'm going to be using is pink grapefruit and citrus. You can use any fragrance oil that you like. Just make sure you check what the recommended use rate is. So on this one, 2.25% is the maximum use rate. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to use it at 2%. Now, this is where we need to measure. You want to go ahead, turn your scale on, put your container on there, and the same thing, we're going to push the tare button. So this brings us back to all zeros. So if you remember, our soap was 3.66 ounces. If we times that by 2%, that gives us 0.07 of an ounce. And that's how much fragrance oil we need for this soap. And I'm at 0.06, 0.07. So this will be the amount of fragrance oil for our melt and pour soap. And just kind of as a rule of thumb, what I like to do is I like to always weigh everything out before I start making my soap. So I find if I don't have all of my stuff, I tend to forget something upstairs, then I'm running up and down. It's a whole to-do. So go ahead, make sure you have your mold. We've already weighed out our 3.66 ounces of white melt and pour soap, 0.07 ounces of fragrance oil, and then I just grabbed a little bit of mica powder. So now we're ready to go ahead and make our soap. For now, I'm going to set the mica powder and the fragrance oil off to the side. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a microwave safe container. You are actually going to pop your soap into the microwave, so that's why we need to make sure that it's microwave safe. And you can just put it all in there. Now, melting it is very important. So when you're melting it, you're going to want to put it in the microwave for like 10 to 15 seconds at a time. Once the timer beeps, go ahead, pull it out, give it a good mix, and then put it back in if you need to. So the reason why we do it in such small increments of time is we don't want to burn our soap. So if you burn your soap, you wind up with like a rubbery, weird bar, and we don't want that. So we're putting in all the time and effort to make our bar of soap. We really want to make the best bar of soap possible. And the reason why it's important to stir well in between each one is sometimes you're going to have little clumps of soap in the middle that aren't all the way melted, but once you start stirring it, it's going to melt in. So we only want to heat this up until it's melted, but not to the point where it's too hard or bubbling or anything like that. So I'm going to pop this in the microwave, I'm going to melt it, and then I will come right back and show you all of the next steps. I just pulled this out of the microwave. It's completely melted, and I always like to put my fragrance oil in first. So you just go ahead and pop it in there, and then we're going to give it a good mix. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add our mica powder. And it doesn't have to be mica powder. Like, they make liquid soap dyes and different colorings that you can use. I just prefer mica powder. I already have it on hand, and I have a pretty good system for getting it to mix in for me. And I don't think that's going to be quite dark enough. So I'm going to add just a bit more mica. And I'm going to keep mixing it in. Okay, now I want to show you something. So if you can see here, we have clumps of mica powder that aren't mixed in. What you can do is grab your rubbing alcohol. See when I spray it, how it starts to break apart? You can do that to help to get the mica powder to break up and mix in easier. You don't have to worry that it's going to leave your soap smelling like rubbing alcohol, because it's not at all. It's going to go ahead and evaporate off, but it does make mixing the mica in there just a little bit easier for you, because sometimes those clumps just don't want to break up, and you'll be here mixing for a while. I also wanted to mention, sometimes you're so busy putting the fragrance oil in and you're trying to mix it to get it to the right color, and you might wind up with your soap setting a little bit on you. So maybe it's starting to get a layer at the top, or it's becoming so thick that it's going to be difficult to pour. You can always pop it back in the microwave. So when I pop it back in the microwave, I'll normally do it for like 2 to 3 seconds. It's not going to take the full 10 to 15 seconds because we're just reheating it up again. Okay, so there is our melted melt and pour soap. We have our fragrance oil in there, we have it colored, and now it's time to pour it into the mold. With your soap, you're always trying to prevent bubbles. So like when you're mixing, you try not to mix too crazy so you don't have like a million bubbles in there. But I like to pour pretty close to my mold. That way I'm not creating any bubbles that I don't need. And I pour relatively slow, so I'm not speed pouring. I just kind of take my time and pour it in there. Once we have our soap poured, what you want to do is go ahead, grab your rubbing alcohol, and I don't know if you can see here, there's a few bubbles. So by giving it a good spray, you're going to pop any of those bubbles that you had on the top of your soap. That way you have a completely smooth soap top. Also, as you can see here, with our 3.66 ounces of soap base, it pretty much filled the mold. We could have used maybe just a wee little bit, so I would say this is probably a 4-ounce mold. And that way, for the next time, you know, anytime you're using this mold, you're going to want to use a total of 4 ounces of melt and pour soap. I will come back after this is cooled completely and show you how to unmold it. Before you unmold your soap, you always want to make sure that it's cooled down. Like more than once when I was first making melt and pour soap, I'll be like, all right, I think it's time to unmold, and I have a really nice soap and I do it and it's not cooled all the way. So the easiest way to kind of check is just feel the bottom of your mold or the sides of your mold. And if it's cool to the touch, you know that it's completely cooled down. So you don't want to risk like breaking a soap when you just needed to wait a few more minutes for it to cool. Now, when I'm unmolding with a silicone mold, I always like pull at the edges first just to kind of release it. And then what I do is with my thumbs, I gently push on the bottom. And then you can just kind of pull it out. And there is your finished melt and pour soap. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoy making your own melt and pour soap. If you have any more questions, feel free to just comment down below. Bye.